Good morning, everybody. Hillary.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Carla, how you doing? Peter?
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. I'm glad we're doing all okay. Let me just pull something up. Okay. Hey, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
We can get started.
So a few of us.
Yeah, it is a small but powerful group.
Yeah.
We'll see. Maybe people might join in over time. But in any event, we're moving on to Pirkei Avot, chapter 4, Mishnah 2, which gets into the big question of how the choices we make impact our outlook and how we look at the world and how we approach it. So, and it's actually got a very, I won't say famous, but a well-known phrase that's been turned into a song, which we'll talk about in a minute in Hebrew. But first, I wanted to share share with you the screen and look at a well-known piece of the Torah that I believe addresses this issue as well. And the reason why is I think that this is the primary, or one of the primary religious or moral questions, right, is how to help ourselves make better decisions. And that is a concern that the Torah has, and even in the rest of the Hebrew Bible, which we can see over and over again. We can reference different things that Moses says or Joshua, and we can even look at the prophet Samuel and the beginning of the kingdom, having a king, all kinds of ways that we can examine how biblical Judaism is focused on this question of the people making good decisions and having a self-driving moral compass, right? So in the beginning of the Torah, in the very beginning of Bereshit, any reflections on places where we see that issue in terms of the stories that we tell from the beginning of the book of Genesis? Or people's choices are the central part of the story.
The fruit.
So first off, just right, the fruit that Chava, that Eve eats, right, and feeds to Adam, right there. Although it's questionable whether Eve knew or didn't know, and right. Exactly. And so I want to, for a quick second, let's take a look at the text that comes right after that. Okay? Vayomer Adonai el Cain, lama hara lach v'lama naflu fanecha. And God said to Cain, why are you distressed, and why is your face fallen? How does that question sound coming from God to Cain? Like, can you imagine saying it as a parent to a child? Hmm? Can we all imagine that? Or not?
Well, God sees Cain is rueful and has second thoughts about what he did.
Well, he hasn't done anything yet. You mean about killing his brother?
Yes.
So this is just in reaction to the offerings that they each make, right? So Cain brought an offering for God from the fruit of the soil, and Abel brought a flock, an animal to sacrifice. So we can see here in verse 4, right? And then God paid heed to Hevel's offering, the animal, but to Cain and his offering, he paid no heed. Right? So that made Cain did not achieve the results he expected. Right?
So he's crestfallen.
And what's the other part of it? It's not just not achieving the results you expect. That's particularly insidious. What's the other part here that really gets at Cain, do you think?
My translation says that God had regard for Abel's offering, but had no regard for Cain's offering. And to me, I try to imagine two children giving a parent a gift, and how and different reactions and how a child would react, and this is always really this passage is always really baffling me.
Okay, Carla, can you go a little bit further? You always imagine how.
Oh, I imagine two children on maybe Mother's Day, and they each bring a gift to the parent, and don't understand why, and the parents regards seems to like one gift more than the other gift, and maybe I'm this passage has always troubled me a lot.
So from the child's perspective, what could be upsetting to them?
Mom didn't like my present.
Okay.
Or Mom liked Billy's present more than mine.
And are those the same things, or are those competing issues, or slightly different issues?
They actually are different issues.
Right. So, like, how is it different from an action where we don't please a parent or someone important on our own, kind of in isolation? How is that different than not pleasing them while one of our peers does? Like in the emotional life.
Oh, it arouses feelings of competition and jealousy between siblings. It would be to me, that would be a normal response,
Mhm.
actually. But it might depend on what the gift was. I mean, if a very thoughtful gift versus a thoughtless gift.
Maybe, right? So let's take this as a survey question for everyone. If you're thinking about these two avenues of emotional distress, one being that I didn't, we'll use this example right here, right? Cain doesn't find God's favor. That's one. And the second one is that in competition with his brother Hevel or Abel, that Abel is successful, right? And that jealousy. Which is the more powerful negative emotion?
The jealousy.
You think the jealousy, does everybody else agree?
Yes.
I think it's the fact that God didn't even acknowledge the gift.
You paid no heed, right? No, absolutely. But Francis, do you agree that that jealousy is the more powerful? Or not?
Yes, I guess so.
Peter, Hillary, anything to add, or Ruth?
That jealousy and competition is very, I'd say, stronger.
Yeah.
And they get mixed up with each other, both the disappointment that you didn't, both the disappointment that yours wasn't acknowledged and the jealousy that someone else was. I don't know that you can actually really separate them most of the time.
True. It's hard, right? Because you usually won't get the second unless you have the first, right? There won't be jealousy unless there's some sort of differentiation. Right. But we can imagine the first without the second.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Right? Just in a one-on-one relationship. Right? So I think it helps us see that so much of how we judge ourselves and how we feel about ourselves, and I think growing up is learning how to continuously learning throughout life how to overcome a sense of judging ourselves based on other people, right? But judging ourselves instead on moral categories and characteristics we want to judge ourselves by, separate from anyone else. And that's a difficult task as a maturing human being, right? That's people go to therapy for years on that.
Going by.
So let's just see what happens here first with Cain and Abel, and then we'll go to the Mishnah. So God says to Cain, "Why are you distressed, and why is your face fallen? Surely, if you do right, there is uplift. But if you do not do right, sin couches at the door. Its urge is toward you. Yet you can be its master." So, can someone put God's instruction to Cain into your own words?
Well, to me, it speaks of strength of character.
Okay. Can you say more, Peter?
Well, I'm not sure how to expand on that.
Okay.
If you are consistent and you really do have a moral compass, that mitigates an awful lot of other things. But if you waver, you just more or less fall by the wayside.
Okay. Anybody want to add or expand on that?
Sometimes it seems like a lot of things boil down to, do you choose to be angry or not? But then it doesn't always seem like becoming angry is, you have a choice in it.
Mm.
I think God is trying to warn Cain, at least sees something within him that is, right now, it's just a very small thing, but it can grow into a very dangerous thing. But it's up to him. God's not going to intervene.
Yeah, and it's interesting, the translation, if you do right. I want to check a different translation because the verb there, which you can see in verse 7, is imtativ, which comes from the Hebrew word tov, which means good. Yeah, the translation is, the generally accepted translation I look at is that, but it also has so it's not just right, but it's goodness also, perhaps. But when God is speaking here to Cain, is he talking about his emotions?
Talking about actions.
Just about actions, right? So if you do the right action, then there will be uplift, whatever that might be. But if you don't do if you don't do good, or if you don't do the right thing, then sin crouches at the door.
And that's where jealousy moves to action, anger.
Yeah. So, well, we know how this story turns out. Let me pull up Pirkei Avot here. Is that too small, or should I make it larger, or is that big enough?
I can expand it on my screen anyway.
Okay, so you guys can make it larger if you want on your own. Great. Okay, so for the Jews in the room, you might have heard this as a song. Mitzvah, Gerera, mitzvah. Avera, Gerera, Avera. I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but it's a song in youth group stuff, in youth group land, right? That one mitzvah leads to another, and one transgression leads to another. So let's get in here. That's in the middle. It comes in 3 pieces here. Ben Azai Omer. So Ben Azai said, Heve ratz lemitzvah kala kevachamura. Ben Azai says, run to do a minor mitzvah just like a major mitzvah, an important mitzvah. Uvoreach min ha'avera, and flee from transgression or sin. We don't really say sin as much as transgression. And then the famous clause in the middle, mitzvah goreret mitzvah, one mitzvah leads to another, va'avera goreret avera, and one transgression leads to another. She'sachar mitzvah, mitzvah, that the reward for doing mitzvah, for doing it and fulfilling God's obligations or commandments, is commandments. The schar avera, avera. The reward of transgression is transgression itself.
8:30 in the morning, room 3B. bonds at $1,000 unsecured, do not owe any money at the time.
There's somebody, a lot of back there. Oh, thanks, sorry. Okay, so we see how this comes in three pieces that are all somewhat similar, right?
Yes.
Kind of different perspectives on the same idea. So this is a rabbi named Ben-Azai. Can we, in our own tradition, like, listen, the idea of mitzvah is a Jewish one. However, we should be able to think within our own religious tradition, whether it's Judaism or Christianity or something else, about what are the instructions of my religion? What does it expect of me? What does it tell me to do? Right? And do I fulfill those? And here, Ben-Azai is saying, be quick to do a minor one as to a major one. Right? So can everyone think of an example of each of those in their own tradition that applies to them? Someone give some examples of a major religious imperative or commandment in your tradition that you would be quick to uphold or to do?
Well, a major one is to atone on the high holidays.
Oh, okay. So to seek atonement on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Peter says, right? That's one that it's a big one, and it's one that you don't lose sight of, right? That you're quick to do. Okay. That's really good. I was actually thinking holidays as well, or Shabbat. Those are kind of clear and easy. Francis, you were going to say something from your tradition?
Yeah, I'm looking at the commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. So during the pandemic, you call your neighbor to see how they're doing, and they say, I have no food. So you go shopping for them.
Yeah.
And you deliver the food to them.
Okay,
one
so
thing leads to another.
So you're saying that loving your neighbor as yourself is a major commandment, which it is. And that's one you're quick to do. Okay. What about a minor? What kind of minor commandment would we contrast with that? That we might not be as obviously inclined to do, but that Ben-Azai here, Rabbi Ben-Azai, would be imploring us to take just as seriously.
Currently counting the Omer.
Currently counting the Omer, okay. Right, and that's holiday related also, so it's not quite as significant as seeking atonement. Nice. I was going to go with like one of the minor fast days is a good comparison.
Or like chasing a goose off before stealing her eggs.
Okay. Well, you think that's a minor one?
No.
There's been some news about it recently.
Really? I've been out of touch. Where is that? Where is that?
Oh, long story, but essentially people who feel that if you see a goose with eggs, you should chase it as the mitzvah rather than at least my reading of it is if you're collecting the eggs, you don't want her to see it.
Okay. Well, because, there's a commandment in the Torah, right? That we should, if we're going to take the eggs, we need to chase off the mother first so she doesn't.
Yes.
which is, I think, the very good question we would ask there, and just as a parenthesis here, is whether that is about the bird or is that about ourselves? Right? Does the bird really have that kind of emotional life? And I don't know, not being a bird, or an ornithologist, but is the Torah concerned with that, or is the Torah concerned with our own emotional life? Like, if we're willing to just walk up to the bird and take the egg out of the nest with no consideration for the bird itself, what happens to our humanity? But you know, that's kind of a parenthetical question, but that's a great point. Anything else? What, Francis? What's a minor, or Carla? What's a minor?
I'm racking my brain to think of.
Well, I was looking at a Luke 16 verse 10, which sounds relevant. Let's see here. He who is faithful in little, of he who has much more will be expected. There's a scripture in that, but which seems actually more relevant to something else that's here, though.
Okay. But what we're trying to imagine here is a minor, like a less important commandment or religious imperative that we should think of as taking just as seriously as a major one, like loving your neighbor as yourself. Right? So, and Peter brought up tshuva, like the idea of repentance before God, and Hillary pointed out that the chasing away of the mother bird when we're taking the eggs, which I think is definitely a minor mitzvah that people don't probably think of too often. I was thinking of one of the minor fast days. Like Tzom Gedalia, the fast for Gedalia. But okay, we don't have to beat a dead horse. Ruth, good to see you. Okay, so what concern do we think that Ben Azai has? Like, why this commandment? Like, or why this bit of advice? What is he worried about us doing or becoming?
Well, deciding minor acts are not important or disregarding certain things as unimportant when they are important.
Mm-hmm.
Something and it changes things in the world, and other times we do things that just change a small thing in our world. And so if we look at the person who has done great things, we think we've done nothing significant. So that I'm thinking is comparing, but we're doing something.
Yeah.
But not thinking we're doing something major. And
So, yeah, go ahead, Margaret.
Yeah.
Well, Margaret, what I hear you saying is that a really interesting idea, which is that if we learn to have equal commitment in our own lives to kind of central commandments as we do to smaller ones, that when we see someone else accomplish something great or perform a great thing, we will not belittle ourselves in our own minds for doing a smaller thing.
Right.
Right?
Right. Some people kind of feel they haven't done anything spiritual because they haven't done these great things.
Yeah,
And that's not a good thing to think about.
that is very interesting.
I'm reminded of a quote from Mother Teresa. She once said, do not let what you cannot do stop you from doing what you can do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, well, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good.
Right.
Right, isn't that all kind of related?
Yes.
Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think that's a great entry point to this concept of Benazais, but I think there might be more to it than that. Or there might be not, I don't want to say more to it. I think there's another angle to look at it from as well. Is there a relationship between, or what is the relationship between essential commandments that we think of and minor commandments? Is there a relationship, and if so, what is it?
I don't think there is a relationship in God's eyes.
So you think each one is kind of independent in its own
They're
silo?
all important.
Hmm?
They're all important.
They're all important.
They're all important. So the question of importance isn't from God's perspective, but only from ours.
Right.
I think it's from our
You think? I don't know. Maybe. I just,
Depends on what.
maybe because in Judaism we have so many more.
I know.
We tend to rank things.
Right.
And
So
I
like,
know.
right now I'm studying Masechet Shabbat, the section of the Talmud all about Shabbat, and for a particular reason, it's gone off into a tangent all about ritual purity. Impurity, like if you come into contact with someone who is got a level or a status of impurity, how does that impact you or your vessels, your tools, the things that you use, and how might that change your access to things that are sacred? And I don't know, I have a hard time putting that on the same level as don't kill or don't murder, right? Or observe Shabbat. But that's me.
And also at the temple, at the time when the temple stood, matters of purity and impurity were more important. They're not really as much a thing anymore.
Exactly, right, Haley? So in the time when we read about it in the Torah is, right, this is a time of centralized worship where there is at the time of the Torah, it's the tent of meeting, and then eventually in Jerusalem, it's the temple, where our level of purity or impurity actually impacted daily life, right? And for us today, it seems anachronistic or just something that's really hard or impossible to relate to, right?
If we're attending our church or our synagogue, and then when we leave, we do cheating and wrong things, it takes it. One side looks like we're keeping all the commandments, but only within the building. And then when we go outside, we are not. Then so that's why I'm saying it's all sacred inside and outside. The inward and the outward journey are all, to me, it's all the same. It should all line up. There's not a place where you can do this and a place where you can do that. The right or the wrong. You know
Yes.
what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, no, I know that because
The holy and the unholy. Okay, I can be holy here, but then when I get out there, I can be unholy again. And I think that's the draw that people, that these kind of teachings are trying to get to us, to keep
Yeah.
the continuity of your holiness wherever you are.
That's really interesting, right? Because like from one of the things that that we have at the synagogue, right, or that we talk about in traditional Jewish life is keeping kosher or observing Shabbat and holidays by limiting our behavior in certain ways.
Right.
Yet, and that's the expectation of everyone in the congregation, is that when we come together as a community, we're going to be observing those.
Right.
And even people who don't observe them outside of the building or outside of communal gathering have, in my experience, have significant investment in us doing it when we are together. Right? So even though they might not keep kosher outside the building, they very much find it important and uplifting that we keep it in the building when we're as a synagogue, right? And the same thing with Shabbat. So on the one level, right, we could look at that as hypocrisy. At the other level, we could look at it as aspirational, that it's about you're not judging too harshly. I think that's one of the challenges that we have is having our mitzvot, at least our I should say our ritual mitzvot, as opposed to our ethical mitzvot, like don't kill people and don't treat people badly, but our ritual mitzvot, not to look at them as either black and white, all or nothing. Like you're afraid that the lightning is going to strike you when you step out the door if you do the wrong thing, or the complete opposite as completely meaningless. It's a tricky balance.
Right. Right.
Oh, I think, did I break up there for a minute? Because
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
my internet tells me I was unstable for a minute. We have a lot of streaming people in the house. Okay, is there anybody, any other thoughts about this? We've kind of kicked it around from a number of different angles.
Well, from the Christian perspective, our pastor says all life is spiritual, whether it's inside or outside. It requires us to act.
Say that again, Francis?
All life is spiritual.
Yeah.
You can't compartmentalize. This is okay. This is not more spiritual. It's all spiritual.
I'm having a hard time hearing you. I don't know if that's just me, Francis, or if that's everyone else.
I have a hard time too.
Yeah. I don't know if you can get closer to the microphone, perhaps.
I said our pastor says all life is spiritual. It's not compartmentalized. It all requires us to do the right thing.
Yes. Okay. So should we go on to the middle section? So Ben Azai is telling us that first, run to do a minor mitzvah, just as you would do a major mitzvah, and flee from sin. Flee away, run away from doing the wrong thing. And his explanation is that one mitzvah will lead to another, one commandment leads to another commandment, and one transgression leads to another transgression. Is this, like, where's the truth in this statement and where is the weakness? Is what I think, because it's a very strong statement. Like, do the right thing, it will lead to doing more right things, and do the wrong thing, it's a pathway down to doing even more wrong things. But we can see that it's not always so simple. right? So this is a commandment I like, or this is a teaching I like to keep in mind when I'm trying to encourage people just to follow the good inclinations of their heart, right? That when you have a positive inspiration or inclination to do something good, whether it's for someone else or it's about yourself and following some sort of spiritual growth, just to do it and not rationalize why it's not a good idea, right? So in this time of isolation, especially, and I think this applies all the time, but especially today, when it comes to, someone, congregants who I talk to, and, I encourage them to, if they have a feeling to call someone, don't think too deeply about why that might why it might not be the right time, or they might not want to hear from you, or they might think that you want something from them or anything like that, but just to respond to that positive inclination and call and just say hello and explain why you're calling. Right? It's too easy for us to create reasons for not doing good things. And I do that partially because I think it's a positive way of going about life, but also because I think that the more we do that and we see the success of it, it leads to more positive outcomes. Right? If I sit here at home and I think, well, there are almost 400 families in the synagogue, there's no way I'm going to get to calling each and every one of the families ever, so why try? Then I'm going to be limited in the good I get to do. But if I just start calling, it's amazing how that might lead to more success. I know if I hear one kind of positive voice, one positive emotional response to me calling, it's good for a number of other calls. It kind of buoys me and inspires me to keep going. And the same way, if I'm having a down day and I rationalize not calling, it could be on any number of ways, right? Like we can imagine all the different rationalizations. It's just going to prevent me from calling and calling and calling, right? It's going to lead me to not doing it more. Is that making sense? Or not so much?
Does it make sense?
A whole lot of sense.
Right, so Ben Isaiah is saying, just do the right thing right now. And it will lead to doing the right thing later. Don't do the wrong thing now, and it will lead to not doing the wrong thing later. There's another, put it in the negative. So that's a pretty straightforward statement. Let's see how it wraps up, and then I want to kind of go back to the Cain and Abel story and see how we compare Ben Isaiah's teaching to God's teaching of Cain. Okay? So he says, the reward for doing a mitzvah is a mitzvah. And the reward for doing for sinning is sin. Do both clauses in that statement make equal sense to you? Or does one make more sense than the other? Oh, Ruth, you're muted. Can you unmute yourself or hold on?
Okay.
There you go, Ruth.
Yeah.
what was I going to say? You have to believe in sin to believe that statement.
Oh, okay. So when you say the word sin, what do you mean?
I don't know what sin means.
It's a good question.
I mean, what does it mean? You're going to be damned to hell? What does it mean? I don't know.
Well, here it's,
It sounds like you're doing the wrong thing. You're doing a bad thing, not a good thing.
yeah.
Not a good thing. But what does sin mean? I don't know. What is the definition of sin?
Well, here the word isn't sin. Here the word that's used is avera, which is really more transgression,
Okay.
right? And it's transgression is really a good translation because la'avor, the verb here is to pass by or to cross over. In fact, it's the name, it's the root of the word for the Hebrew language and for one of the early words of the Jewish people, right? Ivrit is the word in Hebrew for Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
And Ivrim, ones who cross over, is one of the names of the Jewish people early on from crossing. We're not exactly sure why, but crossing over, right? So here, Avera, crossing over, transgressing, like literally to go beyond, to kind of pass by the opportunity to do good and to ignore it, or to pass by an obligation to not do it. So there's no other, it's just about your actions. It's not about the moral quality of the action. Right? And it's specifically not talking about any kind of divine reward and punishment. It's just talking about in this moment right here.
You know, I think doing a good deed does lead to doing more good deeds because it makes you feel good. It makes you feel like you've really done something good and you say, wow, I want to do something like that again. I'm not so sure that doing a transgression leads to more. It can. I mean, I think it can. But I would think it would maybe make you feel guilty and maybe have you think about it and maybe that wasn't such a good thing that I did. I don't think that it necessarily leads to another transgression.
It really depends.
Yeah. I mean, it can. But I think the first part of it is more true than the second part of it.
Yeah.
Of the second one, I've been mulling about that second box there. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm sort of backing up.
Let me ask it this way. Like when I see this, like a transgression leads to another, I think of gateway. Some reason my head goes to gateway drugs. And that from when I was a kid, especially in high school, if you smoke marijuana, you'll be on heroin within months, right? Or, right. So the idea there being that doing this one wrong thing is going to lead you down a path that's you're going to do more and more wrong things that are worse and worse. I think that science has shown that that's not correct.
Can be.
It can be, but it's not in the way that it was predicated, right? That
Not necessarily so.
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
But I would wonder if we think of that, if you say we think of trying marijuana or smoking marijuana as something that's now legal in a number of our states. But let's go back to the 1980s when I was in high school, when it wasn't, and it was far from it. While a willingness to smoke marijuana or try it isn't necessarily going to lead, to heroin usage and addiction, or is not even likely to do so, I don't believe, no more than alcohol or something else. Does a willingness to try something that's, at least by society's legal standards, subversive, make you more willing to do other things that might be subversive? Taking it out of the realm of drugs. But just think of the action of, I'm doing something here that's hazy at best to negative in the idea of the popular culture. does it make me more likely to do other things that might be hazy or bad?
Generally.
I don't know.
So Ruth is shaking her head no, and Francis is saying yes.
I don't think necessarily. Let's say I steal something, okay?
Yeah.
And I remember this. I did steal something when I was a kid. I
Yeah.
went to the store with 3 of my friends, and one of my friends stole a lipstick. And then we all walked out of the store and we all giggled and laughed and we thought that was so cool. And then the other kid said, the other girl said, I'm gonna do that too. And she went in and she stole something, okay? And I finally did do it. And I felt terrible. It did not lead to me stealing again. I have never stolen again. And when I was walking home, I passed a brook. I remember I was going through the field and I threw that lipstick in the brook because I felt so terrible about what I had done. So that's just one example. I think it certainly can lead to, well, I did that little lie, bigger lie, that's okay. It can, but I don't think it necessarily does at all. I think if you have a good moral compass, I think you start thinking about, well, what you did and how you start to feel guilty about it, and then you don't do it anymore, or you don't do something worse. So that's the way I feel about it.
Mm-hmm. Now, if you remember, some of the early, a couple Mishnayot earlier, we. Oh no, it was just last week. I mean, it wasn't last week. It was in the Mishnah previous, in 4:1, where Ben Zoma said, he has those 4 different teachings, and in one of them. Remember, there's a reward promised in the world to come. And we talked about that for a while, right? How do we feel about reward and punishment on divine level? Is that something we think about? And here, Ben Azai is saying, it's not, don't think about the future. Don't think about any kind of spiritual reward and punishment. Right? The reward for doing good is doing good. The reward for doing bad is doing bad.
Right.
And it's very straightforward. And I think that's why I wanted to start with the Cain and Abel story. And, well, it's really the Cain and God story, not the Cain and Abel story, right? Abel is just a prop, in effect. Because this is it seems to me that this is one of the core, if not the core, religious question. Not worshiping God, but serving God by doing what's good. And it's a theme that we could point out and is repeated over and over and over again in kind of very significant ways throughout all of the Bible, all of the prophets, right? They're concerned with behavior, which we see here, not belief or not with worship of God, unless it leads to bad things like idolatry. But that's an action, right? They're more concerned here with actions and doing good actions than beliefs or with thoughts.
Roger. Is it
Right?
true?
So having read Pirkei Avot here, we look at Ben Azai, does that change how we look? I'm going to switch it back. Does it change how we look at this story of God and Cain? And God's advice to Cain, right? If you do right, there is uplift. If you do not do right, then sin here it is. Here is the word sin. Then sin crouches at the door. Its urges towards you, but you can be its master. You can rule over it. Does that sound similar to one mitzvah leads to another, one transgression leads to another, and the reward for a mitzvah is mitzvah, and the reward for transgression is transgression? Or not? It's okay to say no. I mean, if you,
The one thing in the story is Cain never confronts God and says, I'm really upset about this whole thing. He keeps it hidden.
Yeah.
But he expresses it against his brother. That anger.
mm-hmm.
He doesn't seek forgiveness.
Right, there's no response to God. It's just God. Cain goes to his brother.
Passive aggressive.
He doesn't let it go.
He doesn't let it go. How can we, when we look at this story, how can we see one Aveira leading to another Aveira when it comes to Cain? What's his first Aveira? What's his first transgression?
Stress.
What?
Distress.
Jealousy, right? Isn't it jealousy? Well, maybe it's distress first, then it's jealousy. He's first upset that God doesn't accept his offering, and then jealous of his brother's connection with God. What's the next transgression?
Anger.
Anger.
Murder.
Oh, murder. I think there's something between those two, though.
Anger.
Like in here, as you were just noticing, Francis, God speaks to Cain, right, and says, if you do well, if you do good, you'll be uplifted, and if you don't, if you do the wrong thing, then
Go down further.
that's a snare just waiting for you, right? And you'll go further down. But you can master that income. You can master that. And how does Cain react to this?
Silence.
Like, so he ignores, right? He ignores the teaching.
Right.
He ignores this conversation, and he just responds based on his anger. Yeah. So I'm curious if you find this obviously it's a disappointing story, right? But I'm wondering if you find it a satisfying story or if it's unsatisfying.
Puzzling.
Puzzling.
I find it very interesting. I find the sentence, you can master it. Sin is waiting for you, but you can master it. I find that a very interesting statement, and it makes me think, well, how shall I go about doing that?
Right, that's great. That's I think a great perspective to have on it. And so you find, Carl, that means you find it satisfying, right? You find there's good advice, and that God's instruction is one of that's realistic, and that you can grab onto, right? So that's, to me, that would say satisfying.
Yes.
But is anyone unsatisfied by the fact that there's no cure. There's no permanent solution to our baser or our more negative emotions. I mean, there's no, at least according to this text, does it seem like there's any form of ultimate enlightenment? To me, it seems no. There's no ultimate enlightenment here that you achieve, and all of a sudden everything is like, easy to accept. It's that the only enlightenment is knowing that I have to work hard each day to do what's right, and that will lead me to do more what's right. Okay. Well, any final thoughts? Well,
I think this was a
yeah.
great lesson.
What, Carla?
I think this was a great
Yeah.
great study, a great thing to study, and very, very good for me.
Oh, thank you. I was worried that we weren't discussing it as lively, perhaps, in that on one level, it's a very simple statement that he makes, and I hope I didn't complicate it too much by bringing in the Cain and Abel story. But I think it brings some depth to it. Oh, okay. Well, everyone, have a good week.
Thank you very much.
We got, tomorrow night we have a concert going on at 7:30, which should be a lot of fun with Joe Buchanan. And Thursday at 12:30 is the second Rabbi Boot Camp. We'll be covering the rabbinic literature known as Midrash and the different forms, how it works, and how it affects our understanding of Torah even today. And yeah, otherwise, enjoy the last couple days of cool weather before it's summer again on Thursday.
Right.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to it, but also, we'll see how it goes. Everybody have a good day.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.